and I'm going to spend the next couple of segments talking about, well, it's a sensitive issue, particularly if it has affected you or could in the future, because millions of people suffer from depression and millions think about suicide. Suicide is the second leading cause of death in college-age kids. 500,000 are taken to the hospital yearly with suicide attempts. And Lifeway research says that 1 in 3 churchgoers are affected by suicide. So those of you listening right now and sort of brushing aside this topic as irrelevant, please think again. I'd like to welcome back a guest I've not had on here recently, but he makes some of the most tremendous and thought-provoking films. He's got a relatively new film out right now on the topic of suicide. Ray Comfort, welcome back to the program.
Well, thank you for having me back on. I appreciate it.
Ray, Lifeway research article states that few people turn to the church for help before they take their own lives. And I think this fact alone is tragic. So what kind of a message is the church sending that people struggling with thoughts about taking their own life, etc., perhaps would not even think of turning to a pastor or a church worker for help?
Well, that's a really good question. You know, many of our church leaders, our high-profile preachers, have become nothing but motivational speakers. They're not sons of thunder preaching righteousness in the great congregation. They don't preach about sin or the fear of the Lord or righteousness or judgment to come. And consequently, Jesus said, when that sort of thing happens, we become good for nothing, when we lose our salty influence. As the church, the government should be coming to us for moral direction. And they've lost respect for us because we're no different than the world. Our message is no different than the world. And so another virtue of the church is not only salt, but light. And we're in darkness as a nation. Yeah. We're in gross darkness. And now more than ever before, we need to be like John the Baptist, an uncompromising, burning and shining light, so the world are attracted to us and say, look, we've come to you for direction. We don't know what to do. We're in darkness. And if there's anything that's dark, it's the whole subject of suicide. And so that's why we made this movie, to give some light on this terrible subject.
Well, and you suggest, rightly so, and by the way, I have this problem of depression in my family, so I'm painfully aware of it all, but you suggest that shame is often attached to this, and very often this is all called mental illness. Some of it is, of course, and Christians actually can have mental illness, but there are some out there who will only attach shame to what we're talking about, and I think that really complicates the issue. Would I be right?
Yeah, you know, I'm not a big fan of it being called a mental illness because, according to the World Health Organization, 350 million people suffer from depression, which does that mean they're all mentally ill? I think it's more than that. I think billions of people suffer from depression. Very few people go through this life without battling depression because there are a lot of things to be depressed about. There's not only the economy, there's just every area you look, there's just depressing things going on. People dying every day and things that pull us down. And even as a Christian, I get depressed, and sometimes I get depressed for no reason. And only in recent years has it been changed, the last 30 or 40 years, that they began to call it a mental illness. That puts a stigma with it so that people are afraid, especially if you're a celebrity or someone who's well-known, to come out publicly and say, I suffer from depression, therefore I'm mentally ill, because it wasn't that long ago that we had such bad words, thoughtless words for people who are mentally ill and where they went to, the madhouse, the nut house, crazy, etc. And so I would like to say, hey, look, if you're suffering from depression, you're quite sane. It makes sense that you're depressed. There's a lot of things to be depressed about, but one thing the Bible points to is that brings depression on almost everybody, and that's a continual fear of death. The Bible says in the book of Hebrews, for as much as you and I are made of flesh and blood, God became flesh and blood so he could pass through death and destroy him that had the power of death and deliver those who through the fear of death were all their lifetime subject to bondage. And so that's the reality of death and the futility of life and the purposelessness of a godless existence, a justified reason for being depressed. In our movie Exit, we cite a lot of people who are very well known that suffer from terrible depression.
Yes, you did.
They can't even diagnose themselves.
Folks, you can watch this film that Ray Comfort has made, the Exit movie. You can find that and a lot more information at livingwaters.com. Livingwaters.com. It's short. I think it's less than 45 minutes. It's thought-provoking. And Ray, you suggest that, and I couldn't agree with you more, that everyone sort of inside is saying, I have a will to live. It's a sort of a God-given motivation that he's given us, which is, I don't want to die. I really want to live. It's an instinct you feel God's given us. I couldn't agree with you more. And it has sort of, he's created eternity in our hearts. I really resonated with that. And then I also resonated with all of the young people you interviewed. Let me just play a real short clip of some of these young people that you're quizzing quizzing, you're interviewing. I think that their response, and they are so open with you, Ray. They're just, you ask them a question and they just tell you, you know what, life hasn't gone very well for me, therefore I want the exit.
Do you ever think about suicide?
Yes.
What causes your depression?
I think about a lot of stuff. I overthink.
So what do you think about?
I don't know. I dropped out of school. I don't have my dad.
Do you ever think about suicide?
Yeah, I tried it before.
What did you do?
I took pills. I tried to shoot myself, and I tried to hang myself.
At 3 different occasions?
6 different occasions.
No, I just don't think life is generally worth living, so.
You ever consider suicide?
Yes, all the time.
Isn't that scary?
I suppose. But you get kind of used to it after a while.
There was such an epidemic that psychologists reclassified depression as a mental disease, and this paved the way for antidepressants. While many say that these have been helpful in treating their depression, antidepressants remain controversial because they sometimes come with horrific side effects.
I don't look like I usually look. My hands shake real bad. Medication, nothing I can do about it. And my face, I feel like a balloon. My face is all swollen because of the medication.
Ray, again, we're talking medication here, and I think that's a double-edged sword because it really does help a lot of people, and then as you bring out in this little clip here, it's got its devastating side effects as well.
Sometimes watch television and can't believe the advertisements they have where they say, look, we've got a drug here that will help your headaches, your ears will fall off, you go blind, and you'll be paralyzed for life, but it really helps your headaches. The side effects of modern drugs are horrific, and I'm not anti-doctor, but I think we ought to weigh up these things. I think drugs have filled in where the straitjacket left off years ago when someone they considered to be mentally ill, they put them in a straitjacket. Nowadays, they put them in a straitjacket through medication. So I think if anyone is suffering from depression, there are other ways. You know, as I mentioned before, I suffer from depression, but as a Christian, we have the promise of Romans 8:28 that all things are working together for good to those that love God and are called according to his purpose. So when something rotten happens to me, I allow it to draw me closer to God, and even if I do get depressed, I don't think of suicide. It's not an option for me because I'm a Christian and I know that God frowns upon it. Paul and Silas were in jail, in the Philippian jail. It was midnight and there was an earthquake around midnight in the darkness of the midnight hour, and their chains fell off and the doors are open, and that's a picture of the gospel. When Jesus died on the cross, there was an earthquake and our chains fell off and the door of heaven was open. The chains of sin and death fell off. And so we can be like Paul and Silas in that prison and sing hymns to God, sing praises to God, even though they were going through such a justifiably depressing time. And what happens when you do that? When you stand in Romans 8:28, you can say, Lord, I trust you in this. All things are working together for my good, and therefore I won't consider suicide because you're working in my life. And that's the great consolation and the comfort every Christian has. And every non-Christian should look to that for that aspect.
You're listening to Understanding the Times Radio. I'm Jan Markell. I have on the line Ray Comfort because I've just viewed his incredible film on suicide, to be honest, because it's a rising, growing problem. You can watch it at livingwaters.com, and I have Ray on the line here from California. Ray, let me just read 2 paragraphs from Christianity Today. With rising teen suicides, the church cannot afford mixed messages on mental health. The article, a couple of paragraphs here, a 2014 study, more than 3 million adolescents in the U.S. had a major depressive episode in the past year. And yet most schools and most communities remain unprepared to address the challenges they are facing. Given these statistics, our country's youth face a major mental health crisis, one that the church and its pro-life mission need to confront urgently and compassionately. And then a couple more lines here. Yet for many, the stigma of this remains, and those in the church with diagnoses often suffer in silence, having heard that the joy of the Lord is their strength, or they need only to pray more to be more healed, or that happiness will accompany the faithful. Many who suffer from depression and related illnesses keep their diagnoses a shameful secret. And then it concludes, the seemingly rigid legalism of some Christians conveys a sense that we need to be perfect, almost without sin, to be part of a Christian community. It's not surprising that a simple Google search of being perfect as a Christian yields over 5 million sources. Though we acknowledge our imperfections, perfection as followers of Christ, we also hear that those with faith will not struggle, or assuredly they will not mention their struggles in their churches, which is kind of how I opened this segment, and that is how the churches are letting so many people down. But again, your thoughts on this particular CT article?
Well, many of the churches don't know how to handle it. It's a very, very difficult situation, especially when someone says, I'm a Christian, but I suffer from depression and I have suicidal thoughts. And I mentioned before Philippian jail. Remember what happened when the doors were open and all the prisoners were gone? So the Philippian jailer thought, and he got out a sword to kill himself. He was going to commit suicide because he was in a terrible dilemma. There was no way of escape because under Roman law, if you, as a prison guard, lost your prisoner, you suffered from his execution. Whatever was going to happen to him the next day, that was going to happen to you. And all his prisoners were gone, so he thought. But God had done a miracle. Even though the doors are open, all the prisoners were there. He was mistaken. And that's the issue at hand. We've got to remember that God can do a miracle. And when you're a Christian or a non-Christian, don't discount the miracle workings of God. Moses was at the Red Sea. No way of escape, but God did a miracle, opens up. Daniel in the lion's den. There was no way of escape, depressing. Might as well commit suicide before the lions get you. No, God shut their mouths. So when you take your life, when you commit suicide, you're discounting the miracle working of God in your life. So if you're ever considering suicide, just say, Lord, I trust you in this. This is a dilemma. This is a Red Sea. This is a lion's den. I see no way of escape, but I look to you because you're a miracle-working God. And some nowadays discount the miracles of God, but everything around us is a miracle. A baby being born is a miracle. A rose is a miracle. The genius of God's creative hand is all around us, and he can take a situation that may seem to you to be an absolute dead end and find a way out for you. So never, ever consider suicide. Just consider trusting God, even though you're depressed. It's not the absolute answer to depression. You may be still stuck with your depression. You're still stuck in the lion's den, but God stops the mouth. Still stuck at the Red Sea, but God opens it up. So just never, ever consider taking your own life. Just consider trusting God.
You know, you said just a couple of minutes ago that our times are depressing. I mean, our headlines are depressing, Ray. Just about everything we turn on the media has some sort of a depressing tone to it. I mean, we're in the perilous times the Bible predicted. It's just very, very difficult to go through a day without seeing something or hearing something that a very average person who's not even prone to depression, it gets them down. I hear about it every day. I get their emails every day. And as a matter of fact, a number of people are writing me saying, you know what, I'm tuning out. I'm turning the computer off. I'm turning the TV off. I can't take it anymore. Those are pretty healthy people who are writing like that.
I think they're making a wise decision. You know, we've got to remember the news media believes if it bleeds, it leads.
Yeah, exactly.
And so they deliberately put on things that are dramatic and depressing and horrible because, well, who wants to sit and watch good news? And so it's very important that you do consider the book of Philippians, which says whatsoever things are pure, of good report, think on these things, because there's so much negative stuff, but there are good things out there. And soak your soul in the Psalms, soak your soul in the promises of God, and it will lift you up and strengthen you.